Okay, let's talk RFQs, requests for qualifications. Because this is another thing that for VCC, you're going to see a lot more of these. RFQs, we've got, how many, Walter, now? We've got, what, half a dozen lists in the neighborhood of at the moment, and more coming all the time. So there is a lot of opportunity through RFQs. So let's talk about how they work. So the whole purpose of an RFQ is we want to develop a list of qualified suppliers. And then we're going to do something with that list afterwards. And there's two types of lists. And the ones, when Walter and I talk about, the half dozen that we have right now and more to come, these are our ongoing lists that we're talking about with this. So this means we have an ongoing need for these services. We buy, or these goods. We buy them all the time. And so we want to make our processes simpler by establishing this list of qualified suppliers. So we go out for RFQ, we get our list together. And so we're going to be using it over and over again. And the way the RFQ works, according to policy within the college, is that if we're going to buy something off the list and that purchase is under $25,000, we're just going to rotate through the list. So whoever's next up, we're going to go to you first. Hey, can you do this for us? Okay? If it's under 25. Now, if it's 25 or more, up to 75 actually, we're going to get quotes or proposals. We're going to try and do it from 3 of our qualified suppliers, and we're going to select one of them based on, if it's an RFP, it'll be the highest scoring. If it's a quote, the lowest price. However we've established it, we'll select one. And then over 75, everybody on the list gets an opportunity to bid on whatever the work is. But what this means is that we get to restrict who we consider to just our qualified suppliers. Right? So it's great to get onto one of these qualified supplier lists. You want to pay attention to any opportunity to do that. Okay? Our RFQs are going to explain very well how we use the list afterwards. Right? The other type, we haven't used a lot of these, but you see it happen once in a while, where we do a 2-part process. So we do an RFQ to qualify our suppliers, and then only those qualified suppliers are eligible to receive the next documents. And it might be an RFP as the next document, it might be a tender document. So think like a big construction job as an example. We might do an RFQ, qualify our suppliers so that we know everybody on the list is capable of doing the work, and then it's simply, they get the tender documents and the lowest price from our qualified suppliers, that's who's successful. So that's an example of where we might use a 2-part process. Okay? So if you are interested in an RFQ, now normally the RFQ does really focus on the capability section, right? They want to know what your experience is, what your equipment is, your facilities, your people, that type of thing. The same as the capability section in an RFP. Some RFQs will ask you for price. If it's an ongoing list, for example, you might be asked about hourly rates, as an example of what might happen. Okay? So what's important, though, is that you know what's happening with that information, right? So if price is being asked for, again, same as with an RFP, what is the price supposed to include? And are we asking for the price to evaluate it, or simply because we want nominal information? Like we're asking for it for informational purposes to help us with budgeting down the road. And the RFQ should tell you what the purpose of that is. Okay? So any RFQ that you see that interests you, you want to become a qualified supplier, you got to know, how do I get on the list? Right? And there's a number of options for it. Here at the college, we typically will, when it's an ongoing list, we'll say everybody who meets the mandatory requirements and the minimum scores is on the list. Some RFQs, though, will say we're going to take the top 3 or some number like that. Highest scoring, they're the only ones who are going to be on the list. So it needs to tell you how you get on the list. And then what do we do with it once you're on the list? Like, how do I get the contract, right? Because being on the list is great, but what you really want is the work, right? You want to be able to have the contract with the college or whoever has issued your RFQ. So it needs to tell you, how do you get the actual work? How do I get paid for this? Okay? If it doesn't tell you, what are you going to do?
Ask.
You can ask. Yeah, ask. No, how are you developing the list? How do I get on it? How do I get a contract once I'm on the list? Yeah. Now the list should be, for most of the time, it should be updated from time to time, so it might get reissued. I know here at the college, if we reissue an RFQ, it means if you're already a qualified supplier, you don't have to do anything, you're still a qualified supplier. It just means it's an opportunity for other vendors to get on the list as well. So that sometimes happens as well. Okay. So, important that you ask if it's not clear how the list is going to work. Now, yes?
Do you get told you're on the list, or are you just on the list behind the scenes?
You get told.
Yeah.
Any solicitation that you participate in, an RFP and an RFQ, any of those types of solicitations, you will be informed. If you are the successful one, so somebody who is on the list or the highest scoring proponent in an RFP, they get told first. And then those who are unsuccessful, who are not on the list or who are not being awarded the contract, will get told afterwards. And there's a number of recommendations as to when you might be telling them, but you'll be told. An ITQ, on the other hand, you're not always informed simply because it's a price-based. So we might post the price that who we bought it from on the VCC website. And that's actually public information and you can go there and see for yourself, oh yeah, I didn't get it, so-and-so did for this amount of money. Yeah, that'll be posted for you. Yes?
The $25,000 you mentioned, is that a one-time purchase or is that sometimes over a period of time?
Yeah, it's called, it's what we call a discrete buy. So it might be, let's say I have 3 vendors on my qualified supplier list, and I've got 7 contracts this year that I have to do. Obviously, some of those contractors or qualified suppliers are getting more than one contract with us. But if each one is discrete and separate, they are considered discrete and separate. Now, having said that, though, let's say I'm doing a project that's phase 1, phase 2. That's probably the same project, and so I need to be looking at that at overall what's it worth. So it's certainly possible that you could be rotated through your contracts, and collectively you're over 25,000. But with each individual discrete buy, that's what we look at for those thresholds. There's another question?
Is there a list on your website for pre-qualified suppliers?
We're trying very hard to get that list up. Yes, for the half dozen that we have so far, we're looking at a mechanism of making it real easy on the website to see who they are. I'm hoping to have that fairly soon on the external VCC website, so it'll be up soon. In the meantime, if you want to know, we'll tell you who's on our list.
Will you ask?
Well,
On the site?
you can. The best thing to do, though, if you know an RFQ was posted, you just go to the contact person for that RFQ, do a search for closed opportunities, and just ask them, and they'll tell you. Yeah. Now, keeping in mind, a lot of our RFQs qualify individual consultants, and so if you were to ask, like, who made the list, we may not be telling you the individual, we'd be telling you the company that they're with. Yeah, that's who's on our list, and that's just a privacy thing for those individuals. But you would know which companies it is if you wanted to. Okay. So with RFQs, mandatory requirements work the same as it does for an RFP. You have to meet them for us to consider you. If you don't, we're not even going to read your submission. Okay? So things like must be on time, you're going to see that as a mandatory in RFQs. If you're late, we're not going to look at your response. Okay, so very similar to the RFPs, number of copies, on time, specific location. You're not sending it by email, fax, or Canada Post for the same reasons. Now, rather than that proponent section that we had on RFPs, the RFQ is going to ask you for a cover letter. Simplest thing to do is to take the appendix, it's in what the language is supposed to be, copy and paste it onto your letterhead, sign it, and include it. Real easy. And I don't think there's anything in that language that should be, it's not like the RFP where it's absolutely binding because you're not proposing anything, right? You're just saying that whether or not you're qualified to be on our list. So it's a fairly straightforward letter. And some of your RFQs will ask you to complete one or more appendices. Good idea to follow that, whatever that format is, simply because it makes it so much easier for the evaluators. So at the end of the day, on an RFQ, it's much simpler to put an RFQ response together because it's not as detailed information as it is in an RFP, usually speaking. But that means we get a lot more of them. So I might do an RFQ and get, 6, 12, 20 responses to it. So if you've used a consistent approach to the way we've asked you to in terms of how you've presented the information, it makes it easy for the evaluators to find it and to mark it. And actually the same is true if an RFP gives you a template, really good idea to use it, just for the same reason. Make it easy for the evaluators to find information. Okay. And then you may have some RFQ specific mandatories, must have experience in this, must have an office there, whatever they are, specific to whatever the RFQ is. And again, same as with an RFP, if the mandatories are not clear, get the clarity you need. Make no assumptions, black and white, yes, no, very clear. You need that. Doing everybody a favor. Desirable requirements, again, just like an RFP, we're going to be scoring them. Usually focused on the capabilities. We might ask about some key personnel. So you might see some RFQs, and this is true for RFPs as well. You might have some capability sections where we're asking you to name somebody into a role and tell us about their qualifications and experience. Okay. Now, if that were to happen, a lot of organizations have internal policies that state, if there's a new position, you have to go through a posting process. And certainly that's true of a lot of government entities as well. So you might find yourself a little bit between a rock and a hard space. Because here's this RFP or this RFQ that's asking you to name someone into a position that you don't have yet, and you know that if you actually got work, if you were successful in the RFP or became a qualified supplier and were offered a contract, you'd actually have to hire someone into that position. So how do you reconcile that, between what your organization needs to do and what the solicitation's asking for? And I do have a recommendation on how to approach this. Certainly you can ask, here's the situation, what do you recommend for the contact person? And what I respond to with that question, when you're responding to the RFQ or the RFP, name somebody. Because that's how the evaluation is going to be established based on who it is that you've named. So name somebody, tell us how they're qualified and how they're experienced. And then tell us that if you got the contract, that this person would be assigned initially, but that you have to do a posting process. And that your intention is you're going to be hiring someone who is equally or better qualified. Then you've been totally honest and upfront, yep, this is the process we have to do, but you've given us somebody that we can evaluate, because that's all we can do in our evaluation handbook, is follow the information we asked for. Okay? So that is a solution that you can certainly try. But ask the question. Every RFP is different, and or an RFQ, and the contact person might have a different idea. Ask the question. But that's a solution that I've frequently used when those situations happen. You might be asked about how many resources you have available to you of a certain qualifications, your equipment, your facilities, and you might be asked about pricing. It'll tell you if it's evaluated or not, if price is going to be evaluated.